Is cancer preventable? Can we actually prevent it from happening?
And I'll let you all take it.
Yeah, that's it. That's a big question. I'm just going to let you all take that because it's one I asked that whole 11 years. I just really wanted to grab my head around that concept. Can we prevent it?
I think that's so important to ask. And honestly, more research needs to be done. But the one thing that I've been convinced of the course of our production and my personal studying.
Dr. Mindy here.
Your body is in a war zone.
Different parts of the brain get activated depending upon how stressed you are.
When you look at it from that inflammatory.
It's interesting. I mean, that has some merit to it for sure.
And you can't control everything.
I'd say.
And what about a woman who is not pregnant, but she's aiming?
Let me just start off by saying, welcome to the Resetter podcast. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Hey, we're just excited to talk to you.
Thanks for having us, Mindy.
Thank you.
Of
so
course.
Good to see you again.
Yeah, agreed. Here's where I want to start off this conversation. And I don't know if you actually know this about me, but I have gone through the cancer journey intensively with 4 of my patients and actually sat at their bedside days before they died. Wow. And it really moved me. I learned a lot. One woman in particular, her name is Lanny. My first book was completely dedicated to her. And she taught me so much because she was given a cancer diagnosis or a prognosis where they gave her 3 months to live. And she turned it into 11 years. And I learned so much walking that journey with her. So I want to start off with a couple of really interesting thoughts that I gained from that experience. And one is cancer preventable? Can we actually prevent it from happening? And I'll let you all take it. Yeah, that's it. That's a big question. I'm just going to let you all take that because it's one I asked that whole 11 years. I just really wanted to grab my head around that concept. Can we prevent it?
I think that's so important to ask. And honestly, more research needs to be done. But the one thing that I've been convinced of the course of our production and my personal studying is that your DNA is not your destiny. So regardless of what your cancer genes say, maybe you have a BRCA mutation or P152 mutation, that doesn't mean you're going to get cancer. Your epigenetics, your lifestyle, that's what really makes the difference. There are certain genetic mutations, very, very small percentage of people have them that do lead to cancer, usually not terminal. But I think that you sum up what we need to focus on in the future is, can it be completely prevented? Once we understand the cause fully, that's going to lead to those interventions.
Of cancers, 5% about are hereditary. And if you have one of the BRCA gene, that's one of the most common genes that cause cancer. You have about a 50-50 chance, and that's of that gene going bad.
I do want to emphasize on BRCA though. It used to be a 40% chance, 70 years ago with a different diet, different lifestyle. And now it's up to 70% of people. And that's not because the gene changes, but it has a lot to do with the environment that we live in.
Yeah. So your genes, basically only 5% of people have this, of cancers even. So that's 2.5% of people have a chance of inheriting a cancer. So is cancer preventable? If the 95% of cancers come from diet and lifestyle, I would think so.
So here's what's really interesting. Now, in this journey that I took with Lanny, she actually came into my office, a lot of women asking for help for her child, which I think is always so interesting. And she was sitting in my waiting room. She had just gone through radiation and chemo. She had no hair. You could tell that she was going through cancer treatment. And when I dove into chatting with her about what education she got, now this was 20 years ago. This is a long time ago, or maybe maybe about 15 years ago. I said, what did they teach you about how you got cancer? And she looked at me and she said, what do you mean how I got cancer? They just told me I had it. It was genetic, and here was my treatment. And so I started going down a path with her. The very first thing I taught her was how to eat. And I actually took her to a supermarket. We went into the supermarket and I taught her how to read a label. And here she was at the time, like in her early 40s, learning how to read a label for the first time. And at one point she turned to me and she said, wait a second. And we were in a store called Safeway. That was literally the grocery store's name. And she's like, are you telling me that there are foods that are in this store that are not safe, even though the store is called Safeway?
Yeah.
And I was like, yep. That's what I'm telling you. So do you think that food is the first place we can start when we look at what's building cancer and how we can prevent it?
For some people, that is the easiest, most successful way to start. I think what you consume and what you don't consume and when you consume it are all really important. But from the beginning, especially in today's society, just having a little more control and mindfulness about what's going into your body and making sure that it's something that's going to be healing to you and not detrimental.
Right. I mean, where do we start with that? So I know that you've gotten really into fasting, which is amazing. I had a beautiful conversation yesterday with Dr. Dale Bredesen about the importance of metabolic switching for preventing Alzheimer's. I'm starting to feel like fasting, metabolic switching, glucose management are the keys to preventing everything. Would you agree on that when it comes to cancer?
Yeah, I think there's more even that can be involved, but definitely your diet is so important. And for me personally, when I was diagnosed with my terminal stage 4 lung cancer, non-smokers lung cancer, which all the doctors were like, oh, you're one of the unlucky ones, I had to take a long, hard look at how I was treating my body with what I put into it. And I wasn't just unlucky. Like, I have a metabolic genetic mutation, but this is something that I developed over time because I feel that I wasn't treating my body well. I thought I had the healthy standard American diet with whole grains and non-fat dairy, lean meats, things like that. But I just wasn't looking deep enough, and I had a lot of stress, and I had quite the alcohol enthusiasm, drinking a bottle of wine a night to deal with that. So when I finally put my health first and saying, like, my body is screaming out. It's decided it doesn't even want to be alive anymore. I had 6 to 8 months to live. Let's make those 6 to 8 months exactly what my body needs and to start paying attention to it. And these days, it's not about like, trying to live as long as possible, but trying to have the best life that I possibly can. And I cannot do that without paying attention to my body and other healing factors like fasting, stress reduction, mindfulness, medication, breath work. All these things for me personally work so important in conjunction. But it all started with diet.
You know what's so interesting to me is that there are like foundational behaviors that we should be doing through lifestyle. Like Dale yesterday was talking a lot about 7 things we need to do to prevent Alzheimer's. And I bet if we look, you just reminded me of this, I bet if we look at those 7 things, they're the same things you do to prevent cancer, to prevent heart problems, to prevent menopause symptoms. You know, at some point we're going to have to diabetes, bad COVID outcomes. Like at some point we're going to have to start taking responsibility for our health and understand that lifestyle is the key to everything. So where do you go when you hit that moment where you've been given this horrific diagnosis? How do you go from the fear of that moment into empowerment and seeing that there's so many aspects of your lifestyle that need to change?
Oh, Mindy, you hit it on the head, that fear and that urgency. And learning, I just turned 40. I thought I was healthy. It was non-smokers lung cancer, so something I never would have expected. And the first place that I went, which I'm embarrassed to admit, is I'm going to die well. I'm going to listen to my doctors when they say I'm terminal. I will be terminal. And my one goal was to make Brad proud of me, my doctors proud of me by dying well. And thank God that only lasted for about 5 days. I was diagnosed on a Monday. That weekend, we went off. I started reading all my cancer books, what's out there. And I realized some people do survive. And I think that if anybody could survive, I could do it. And I have a little too much self-esteem that way, maybe. But I decided I know my body better than any of my doctors do. I know how I feel better than any scan. And I'm just going to focus on that. Try to live a good life during however much time I have left. I could be hit by a car tomorrow. And that became my goal, my quality of life. I wasn't trying, maybe deep down I was hoping for a little cancer outcome, but really what I was hoping for was a good quality life. And I've had that, and that's the most important thing. But those books that I was reading is what brought up how a dietary change is very often the first thing that happens in people with radical remissions or unexpected improvements. Dr. Kelly Turner talks about this in her book, Radical Remission. So I was like, okay, from now on, that weekend, the first weekend after my diagnosis, I decided not to put anything into my body that wasn't actively healing. And at the time, we had just moved from Hong Kong, but it had very different access to food, definitely no access to the clean meats. And we still found a way to deal with that, even if dealing with that was my first 24-hour fast after I made that decision. And then the following week, sending Brad out, running around Hong Kong, looking for all the organic produce, anything that he could find that I could find a study on in PubMed that had actually shown it either cures cancer in the petri dish or it increases your immune system, or anything that was documented. This is healing.
Yeah. I was just going to say, how usually you go on a ketogenic diet, you got to kind of like ease into it. I mean, like she just she just stopped eating. Like she was just like, hey, this is important. I'm going to do this. So she's just like a force.
One of the reasons that I'm so grateful to the severity of my cancer, because I would never have gone to such lengths to change my lifestyle if it weren't life and death and it wasn't immediate. Yeah. And I know for some people it can be triggering, and it's never a comment on or judgment that you're responsible for your cancer. We live in a world that sets that up, and it's not any individual's fault, but it also provides the hope, if you're interested, that it can be within your control. But certainly no judgment to anybody who chooses not to go that path.
Christine, you bring up an interesting point, because as I've helped coach people over the years from a variety of chronic conditions, I have found that the more severe the condition, the more willing the person is to make a change. And there became a moment in my clinical practice where I only would take the severe cases, because if people were just kind of wanting to dip their toe in, I'm like, there's the world will send you too many mixed messages. You're going to find too many reasons why you can't do the difficult. But when you have a death date that is facing you, staring you in the face, you will do anything. And one of the things I learned in walking this journey with this patient of mine, Lanny, was that I was going to live every day as if I did have a cancer diagnosis. Like, why don't I ask myself every single day, what would you do tomorrow if you were given that diagnosis? And I have to tell you, at this particular moment in my life, I wouldn't change anything. I feel like I'm very much living every day as if I was so serious about my health that I could overturn a cancer diagnosis. And I feel like it is a gift that you got on one level that all of us could learn from.
Oh, that's such a beautiful sentiment.
Yeah. And honestly, it's one of the things that we just sort of talk about privately all the time is just this normalization of what we're eating, right? It's like, well, how come... I mean, I know fast food is convenient, but it's like, how did we ever get to this place where we're just like filling our bodies with like garbage, right? It's so sad.
And so acceptable is what it is. Like that now you have an eating disorder if you're only eating healthful foods.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And we're going to actually give it a name. They have like a new name for it.
Orthorexia. I'm a proud orthorectic.
Me too. Yeah, and I, when I travel around the country, I always, when I'm in airports and I'm watching the stress people are under, I'm watching the foods they're eating, it breaks my heart. And I think, like, why don't more people have cancer? Why don't more people realize that if they change the way they ate, they would think different, they would sleep different, they would feel different? Like, to your point, Brad, when did we get off that path? I think we just assume food is food, and we don't know that it either is going to build disease or build health. I have no idea how we got where the awareness on food got so bad.
And you can see it, though, over the last 70 years, because it tracks with all these chronic diseases like diabetes, Alzheimer's or type 3 diabetes, cancer. They're all going up as our food production and system is going way down.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So this again is one of the reasons I got so excited about fasting. And the fun part of this story that I get to tell, and I don't think I've actually, no, I told it in Fast Like a Girl. I put it in the end notes. It was a really important story for me to put out there. And that was that a month before Lanny passed, maybe a month or two before this patient that I had walked this journey with, before she passed, she actually asked me about fasting. And she said, what do you know about fasting? And it was about that time that Dr. Osumi's work that was coming out on autophagy, and we were learning that in a fasted state, the cells repaired themselves. And I remember turning to her and saying, I don't know anything about fasting, but I'm going to find out for you.
Wow.
And then
origin story.
Yeah.
Right? And then 2 months later, she passed, and it propelled me to figure this part of the puzzle out, because she had done everything. She had changed the way she ate. She had changed the beauty products. She had totally handled her stress. Like, she had done everything. She had gone to every alternative doctor. She literally turned like 3 months into 11 years. But one thing that we didn't do was fasting. So talk a little bit about where fasting fits in to the cancer journey, because it's something I've never been completely able to answer for myself.
Wow. So I had no idea on this at the beginning until I ran across Dr. Walter Longo's research out of USC. And he focused originally on longevity, but the cancer science has become incredible that if you fast 3 days before you start your chemo, it's more effective before radiation. And that's when I really discovered the power of it, because I had 2 rounds of brain storage radiations. Sorry, both those rounds caused some aphasia from my brain injury, which you're hearing now. But 2 rounds for 2 tumors each in Hong Kong, same hospital, same radiologist. The first round, I was just beginning my cancer journey, and I was still eating healthy. I went in, and it was devastating. It was 3 weeks on the couch, sweating, crying, vomiting.
Wow.
Couldn't work, obviously. The next session, 6 months later, less than 6 months, I went in again, walked home from the hospital on a Friday, went back to work on a Monday, felt amazing. And the only difference is the second time I fasted, water fasted 3 days before and about a day after. And it was profound. And sometimes I worry that it was, made my radiation so effective that's why I have this brain injury now, the brain radiation necrosis. Honestly,
they didn't need as much.
Exactly. And really, most people don't live as long as I do after having this radiosurgery. People just didn't know enough about it. But now more and more people are living long enough to get it. And so the science is coming out. And candidly, the fact that I am as functional as I am, my neuro-oncologist told me just at my last session that if he showed my MRIs to 10 different doctors, all 10 would say I'm a vegetable. I shouldn't be able to walk or talk. And this was right after I'd come back from a solo trip to Indonesia to get my yoga teacher training. So I do have some dysfunction, but it just shows that your scans, your doctors, they don't know everything. And I believe that my fasting, my stress reduction techniques are what causes this neuroplasticity, where my mind can still function, even if it looks like mush in the scans.
I think this is just like a good time to throw in, like, your viewers are all familiar probably with the ketogenic diet and fasting. And that basically the reason that this works for cancer patients is the idea that cancers, more than other cells, want glucose. So the higher your blood glucose is, you're basically feeding your cancer cells. So obviously you can't completely cut the glucose out of your system, but if you can go on a ketogenic diet or fast especially, you're basically taking away a lot of the fuel sources for cancer. And that's the background. That's the science behind it.
And your listeners know that ketosis, the state of ketosis, is not the same as the ketogenic diet, eating bacon, meat. It can be fasting. It can be reached so many different ways. And it's that ketosis that's so healing.
Yeah. I actually think the best door into ketosis is fasting. I think that's and then use food to that food window to actually fuel yourself, and use your fasting window to tap into the ketogenic energy system. And then you're getting the best of both worlds. So that's the way I like. And maybe your eating window is only an hour long, so you're getting more ketones. You're allowing yourself to get more ketones. But what I've noticed that a lot of people did in the ketogenic movement is that they wanted to up, like to your point, like up the bacon, up all the harmful fats, which is not great, and lower all the carbs. We still need some carbs, and that particular diet wasn't the end all be all. They needed, if we just use the fasting window to get ketones and then use the eating window to fuel ourselves, now we could marry two beautiful healing strategies together. So that's, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that for cancer, but I have found that that's the best way just in general for humans.
It's been the best way for me. And Brad fasts with me. We do 44 hours water fasting every week, much more once a month. And it's the best thing to get us into ketosis. I also, and I don't advocate this, was plant-based during my year of healing just because of the foods I could get in Hong Kong. So a lot of those good carbs, I was able to keep my ketones up. And the real reason that a state of ketosis works so well, Brad, you can explain how the fasting works, that it actually strengthens your healthy cells.
Oh, yeah. But basically what happened to Maggie when she got her radiation is this, when you fast, your normal cells sort of go into like a sort of slightly protective state, like a little bit of a hibernating type. They're just like, hey, there's no fuel out here. I got to kind of like lock down and just sort of protect myself. Cancer cells doesn't appear have the ability to do that. They're still trying to take up as much glucose as possible. They're out there scavenging up everything. So if you're fasting and then you introduce a drug or radiation, your cancer cells are basically leaving the door wide open to this therapy, and your healthy cells have kind of closed themselves off. So the therapies become much more effective. That's basically, I think, is that what you're after?
Yeah, I've never heard that. Go ahead. I never heard it explained that. Yeah. Love that.
Yeah.
And then to your point, I think there are so many different ways of eating that depend on a person's genetics, epigenetics, lifestyle, disease state, all of that can be healing. But one thing that is almost universally, unless you have a very strong reason against it, is fasting. Because it doesn't matter how you get there, you still have that healing state.
A question I get a lot is fasting appropriate for all cancers? And I know Dr. Nasha and I have talked a little bit about this, but how do we know if your cancer is the one that fasting will work for?
So, and this is still being studied, so I want to say that what we're talking about isn't completely determined, but 70 to 90% of late-stage cancers are glycolytic in nature. They need glucose, and so they're going to be benefited by not having the glucose available. And there are other things that cancer can eat, notably glutamine, which would also be reduced by fasting. The things that really would not help with fasting is if you're pregnant, if you maybe have been anorexic in the past, your doctors can let you know whether it's appropriate for you or not. But the mistake that happens so often is that doctors still don't understand that cachexia, the state of muscle loss that is responsible for so many cancer deaths, is not a reason not to fast, because fasting is coming to show that it can
actually reverse cachexia.
Yeah, will definitely prevent and possibly reverse is what the latest studies say.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because it holds on to your fat. It stores it keeps your fat, and that's what you're actually losing when you have cachexia. You're just shedding all your fat.
No, cachexia is when you shed your muscles.
Oh, sorry, the other way. Yes, sorry, the other way. Yeah.
So it preserves your muscle. So this actually ties into a really beautiful thought that I've had in just teaching the world to fast. I get so much pushback that fasting breaks muscle down. And one of the things that I really try to emphasize to people is that maybe in the fasted moment, it is breaking muscle down, but what that means, let's dive a little deeper into what that means. It means that it is getting rid of the stored sugar that is inside that muscle so it can clean the muscle up so it can be a stronger, more efficient muscle. And then when you bring food back into the equation, especially protein, you now could stimulate mTOR in a positive way, and you could actually build that muscle stronger. And this is what we're seeing with all these menopausal women in my community, is that yes, we put them in fasted states. Yes, the body gets rid of stored sugar, it improves itself, and then we put the right foods back into the equation, it builds itself stronger. So it ties into something that you said, Maggie, that's really interesting to me, is that you're no longer on a plant-based diet. to me, in order to build muscle, we got to have protein. And I can't get the protein that I need on a plant-based diet. But from a cancer standpoint, why animal, not plant-based?
Absolutely. And again, this is different for everyone. And anybody out there who's affected by cancer needs to talk to their metabolically informed physician. But there's been a lot of research, especially by Walter Longo.
That was well said. Well said. I don't want anybody to miss that. You got to make sure that
yes, don't take it from me. I'm N1.
Yeah. Or just your general oncologist, right? They're going to not know what you're talking about.
Yeah. What's a metabolic, just before we go any further, what's a metabolically informed oncologist? How do we know if we have one?
They're hard to find, but if you mention the metabolic theory of cancer, they should understand if they know that PET scans work to diagnose your cancer because your cancer is eating more sugar, and therefore sugar maybe isn't something you should eat. If they're not offering you orange juice and Ensure before your chemo, that would be a clue. But there are places out there to find them. I have a list on my site. Dr. Nasha has them on her terrain.network site. Care Oncology, Beacon Metabolic Care, they're out there, and they're becoming more and more of them. Not to mention the Charlie Foundation has a great resource for dietitians who practice this and understand that keto and fasting are both safe and effective for a lot of different stages.
Yeah. That's what I was going to add is if you can just find an oncologist that will work with a nutritionist, that is usually, if you find if your oncologist is just like, nutrition, that doesn't mean anything, you're probably going to have some trouble. But if you have an oncologist that can work with a nutritionist, a lot of times they're sort of bound by their standard of care as to what they can prescribe, but they can actually shuttle you to a nutritionist that will work with you at the same time. That can be really helpful. So it could be sometimes it could sometimes not even be the oncologist themselves, but just sort of this, sort of team of people. Yeah.
Awesome.
But to your point about protein and cancers, it was Dr. Walter Longo who's done a lot of research on that. And partly because glutamine is a fuel for cancer, recommends a lower protein diet. Now, obviously, if you're on chemo, if you've had surgery, you need that protein to be able to repair your body, get good, clean protein. But it's an individual choice also based on genetics, epigenetics. And for me, plant-based was what worked for me at the time. And since then, we've moved to the US where we have access to non-factory raised meats. And it's great to be able to get back into that. But for me, I found that the factory raised meat that I had access to in Hong Kong was so much more dangerous and less healing to my body. And I just wanted to get the things that I knew were going to help me. One thing, especially for people with a disease of unregulated growth like cancer, is we have to be careful about the hormones in animals, and especially in dairy, that is there to braid, these giant animals to be even bigger. We don't necessarily need that for our cancer.
Yeah. So I just want to make sure we don't lose what you just said, because you bring up a brilliant point, which is commercial meat with hormones and toxins and antibiotics pumped into it is not a health food. So what I heard you say is you made a choice that you didn't have access to clean meat. So plant-based was a better option so you could avoid all those toxins. Yeah. But then once you had access to clean meats, is what I call them, you started to bring some of them back in. Did I hear that right?
Exactly. And when I talk plant-based, it's never like full vegan. I was eating organic pasture-raised eggs, wild-caught fish. It just meant that about 90 to 95% of my calories came from plants, which is the traditional definition. It's not a vegan diet. And again, it can differ for so many people, but you have to find what resonates for you and what you feel is healing, because that's what's going to work ultimately. I mean, the placebo effect reigns supreme in all of this.
Definitely. Where do toxins fit into this? Because I know, again, with Lanny, she went home and scanned. She found an app on her phone, scanned all her products, literally went crazy in one weekend and got rid of all the toxins. It sounds like that was a familiar story.
Almost as important as diet. Diet was the first thing I cleaned up. My water was the next thing. And then I had to get rid of all my cosmetics. We chose different detergents. We have an air purifier, water purifier. I stopped using the cleaner on my yoga mat. Ingredients.
I just say, there's this one day that Maggie came home, and this was she was just like, did you know that the skin is the biggest organ in your body? And then we had a week of just this is gone, this is gone, this is gone, this is it was just like,
Yeah.
I was like, can I even use my old toothpaste anymore? I would just like everything in our house, just like in our bathroom, was just like gone and replaced.
So now our philosophy is, if you're not going to put it in your mouth, don't put it on your skin.
I taught my daughter that. My 23-year-old daughter that when I started to realize beauty products were so toxic. I'm like, just easiest thing, look at it and say, would I eat it? If I'm not going to eat it, put it back. Everything with a natural ingredient you should be able to eat. You have no problem. The other thing about this skin, I don't know if you all know this, is that there is a connection from the microbiome of the skin to the microbiome of the gut. And one of the things that really concerned me during the pandemic was all the hand sanitizers we were putting on our hands.
Yeah.
And people weren't realizing that it was actually leading to leaky gut syndrome and imbalances, gut dysbiosis situations, because those two organs, the skin and the gut, are constantly talking to each other. So Scott, tell me a little bit about gut-wise, did you have to do any changes to your gut? Because the microbiome is a big part of our immunity. How did you dive into that?
This has been a challenge for me recently, just because of my survivorship issues with the chemo I went through and the radiation and all of that, where I developed SIBO, or small intestinal bacteria overgrowth. And that really did wake me up into the importance of your gut for detoxifying, obviously, for just keeping things moving, and for just being a part of your beautiful body. Like, these little microbes are there, part of your ecosystem, and I want to support that. And so it's been a work in progress for me about 3 years now, continually focusing on that. But I do think that the foods that I'm eating now, no grains, no dairy, all of that is definitely in support. And again, the fact that I am as functional and happy as I am right now with all these issues, I think there's a lot of what would you say, that comes from your gut that can influence your mood?
Oh, 1,000%, 1,000%, definitely. So, okay. And then what about sleep? That's the other one that as I've been journeying through my menopause years, I just am starting to prioritize sleep so much more. I used to wear it as a badge of honor that I could get away with less sleep. And now I'm like, everybody needs to go home at 8 o'clock so I can go to sleep. Where was sleep on the healing journey for you?
Oh, you're my person.
Right? I know. That's right.
So I'm very blessed that I never had a problem sleeping, maybe a little insomnia. But our culture, like you say, it's like, oh my gosh, not being able to sleep is a badge of honor, get back to work and all of that. So for me, now that I have the brain injury, sleep is more critical than ever. Like, nothing heals my brain more than fasting and sleep. But it's still hard because of the cultural way that we were raised, that like I feel lazy if I get more than 10 hours. And just thank God for Brad, who's always supportive, who knows that if I don't sleep enough, then I'm not going to talk, or I'm not going to be as functional. And that's just my brain injury. That doesn't even represent what other people are experiencing, because when you sleep is when your cells are turning over, they're getting healthier, your immune system is at work. So critical. But just like food and trying to push away the societal idea of like eating crap, we have to push away the idea that staying awake is a good thing. We need to prioritize our health.
Yeah.
Do you find people give you more grace because they know you had a diagnosis? Or they like, oh yeah, of course you need to go home and sleep. Of course you're eating that way. Like, do you get a free pass, a social pass?
Definitely was for the eating. Like, when I was in Hong Kong during my healing, we went through, the Chinese New Year with the moon cakes and everybody at the office wanting to really comfort me and to give me something. And we're just used to giving food for comfort. And it was very easy for me to say, oh no, I can't do this because of my cancer treatment. And I know it's much, much harder for people to be able to turn down in a loving way foods that are really poisonous without hurting somebody's feelings. And so I use it as an excuse as much as I could. And Brad, I don't know how you get away with it now, because he eats the same way I do without the diagnosis.
Oh, yeah. Just have like maybe a nibble and just thank you so much, or just I'll have it later, right? Just set it aside.
Here's what happens with food. And I think it's so interesting as a couple, like being able to see that she gets the free pass and you might not, because when we put some bad food out there, or their drinks out there, when somebody makes a stand for not eating in that way because they want to be healthy, it's like a mirror back to the person who served you the food that what they're eating is unhealthy.
Yeah.
And so in order to make themselves feel better, they need you to eat. They need you to stay up late. They need you to participate in these behaviors because otherwise there's this internal reflection that happens that makes people feel bad when you're making a stance for your health. That we've got to change.
True. And like we try to be as non-judgmental as possible, but it's really hard for people not to take it as a judgment that I just want to have this lifestyle. You can have your lifestyle, no judgment. It's hard.
Yeah. I mean, I have family members that have seen what Maggie's gone through. Then I started doing the ketogenic diet. They've seen me and my lifestyle changes. I've lost like 50 pounds, and it's like I still can't get these people that are close to me to adopt this lifestyle. It's just like so frustrating.
But it's also okay. Like we have to accept them.
Yeah, of course I still accept
and
them.
just be an example.
Yeah, they're my family. But yeah, it is frustrating because you're like, I can help you, right? Or I can put you in touch with someone that can help you, right?
Yeah.
But the
very hard
thing is we just sadly do not go out, period.
Yes.
And so we'll cook for our friends and family when they're at home, and then they get to eat the delicious foods that we eat. And we don't give gifts of food or candy or anything like that because these are people that we love and we don't want to poison them. And, if they want to do it themselves, that's fine, but not for us.
I drag us to a seafood restaurant every once in a while. That's about it.
Yeah. I was going to say, talk about not eating out, because I'll tell you that I had a really interesting experience with a patient who ate out all the time. And we ran her Dutch test, and her toxic estrogen was so high. And I tried to break down where it might be coming from. And then she explained to me that she and her husband ate out like 5 days a week. It was a part of their social behavior, and it was going to be very difficult for her to not eat out. And my response to her was, if you don't get this under control, your husband's not going to have a wife to go eat out with. So I do, and my husband and I do the same thing. We don't eat out as much. So just so people understand, why don't you eat out? What is it that you can't get in a restaurant that you get at home?
Anything healing for me. Like if somebody else is preparing it, it's going to be prepared with seed oils. And for those who don't listen to enough Mindy, listen to more Mindy and you'll understand the dangers of that. You don't know completely what's in it, what's organic. So yeah, we just make it ourselves and then we feel safe. It's good. It comes from a source that we believe in.
I mean, you've heard Ben talk, and Ben Bidazadi, or obviously Miriam Kalamian. We've talked with her a lot, and it's like, if you are extremely vigilant and you go out to eat and you tell your waiter that I'm allergic to like these 10 things or whatever, I mean, you're like, just give me the lettuce. You can make it happen. You can make it work. But at some point for us, it became a lot of work. And then you also brought this up earlier. It's like you're kind of sitting there in the restaurant watching other people eat things that aren't healthy for them. That's kind of like kind of brings you down a little bit. And it's like what we have done is actually tried to search out restaurants that have organic base, or, that are just very proud of, like where they've sourced their food from. And then you can sit down in the restaurant and actually know that you're getting something healthy and that the people around you are also eating something healthy, so you don't have that drag. So that's one of the ways that, and when you're on the road, that's kind of what you have to do, right? It's like,
we go grocery shopping and make a salad at home. I remember the first time in Hong Kong, I went out and I ordered a Caesar salad with no croutons, no Parmesan, no sauce, no dressing, and it was just romaine, and I was like, I'm not going out anymore. This isn't any fun.
And then they bring the bread basket, and they bring you the dessert menu, and like there's a lot of willpower that's got to happen when people are bringing you all the possible dangerous food. So that's absolutely why we just, unless it's a farm to table organic restaurant, we would prefer to make food at home. Talk a little bit about, I feel like this is the elephant in the women health room. And it's that our bodies, from a nervous system standpoint, from a hormone standpoint, need a lot more rest than a male body. And the more we push through and have what Libby Weaver coined the term rushing woman syndrome, the more that we are rushing and stressing out, the weaker our immune system, the worse our health becomes. And we are completely different than men in that when you look at us hormonally. So did you have to reorganize and prioritize downtime, learn to say no? How do you take the rushing woman out of a diagnosis like that?
It's so hard because we do feel responsible for everything. And, in a way that we're blessed that I didn't have children to look after, but I still felt like I had to look after Brad, after my coworkers, everybody.
Definitely has to look after me.
No, but that's the thing. I found that I do have support.
Right.
And Brad is there. And I need his constant encouragement to say, like, no, take a minute, don't do this, prioritize yourself. But it would have been very, very difficult for me if I didn't have somebody from the outside giving me perspective on that. And I know a lot of cancer sufferers do not have that. And I constantly try to share what I have, saying prioritize yourself. If you have this diagnosis, your body is saying you've got to pay more attention to me, you've got to put me first. And hopefully somebody doesn't need a stage 4 terminal diagnosis to get that message. But it's hard.
Yeah. And just from a caregiver perspective, I would just add, it's easy to kind of sort of wrap yourself up in what's going on and just try to remember to focus on what are the needs of like your significant other or whoever you're helping, right? It's just, it's like as soon as she started having these brain issues and it was like we were like the best thing for her is sleep. That's where, dead tissues get flushed out of your brain. You pretty much have to be asleep for this kind of, that's the most efficient way. And I was just like, you have a free pass to sleep as much as you possibly can. So it's just prioritizing these things. And that can be hard, obviously, if you have to, have other responsibilities, kids or a job. I mean, you're juggling. Yeah. But you have to do the best you can.
What would you tell somebody who gets a diagnosis of cancer? Where's the first place they go? Because that moment has to be really scary. And how do you go from that into a motivated place where you can actually start to unwind it?
The very first thing I think somebody needs is to let go of the urgency. When you first find out you have cancer inside of you, I did. All I wanted was get it out, burn it. Luckily I wasn't operable, but do whatever you can do to get it out. And then I have to realize, no, this cancer has been inside me for years. It's been developing. And so I don't need a doctor to tell me, like, do it now. I need to take a minute, take a breath, and figure out what's right for me. Use your doctors for their wonderful knowledge to help inform you, but ultimately you know your body best. And what resonates for you, back to the placebo effect, is going to be what's most helpful. And so if people can just feel empowered, get that sense of agency, and know that the statistics may not apply to them, I think that's number one. And then that's going to lead them to the diet, to the exercise, to taking care of their body and all of that.
And where do you feel like, we have traditional cancer treatment and we have a more natural cancer treatment. I see that there tends to be this division where it's like some people are like, well, I'm going to go the more traditional, so I won't do the natural. And the other people with the natural say, well, I'm going to do the natural, I won't do the traditional. Is there a way where we can integrate both? Because there are benefits to it all.
Exactly. And there is this divide, just like there is in diet, where people consider it's one or the other. And when I was first diagnosed, I was deeply adherent to allopathic medicine, super Western. And I was living in Hong Kong where TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, is medicine, fortunately. And I slowly realized that what's been healing to people for the last 3,000 years maybe can have something relevant to this allopathic medicine we've had for the last 70 years. And so there's a little bit that you can take from both. And I hate the idea that you have to go the traditional route or alternative. So many of the metabolic treatments that we talk about are complementary. They are integrative. Right. And people can choose from this wonderful palette that we have of surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, mistletoe, stress reduction, diet, all of this. Figure out what's going to work for them, work with a doctor who supports that. And I think that's the quickest, easiest path to healing.
Yeah, I like to think of it as there's so many things you can do in addition to what your doctor may have given you. And yet I feel like what I've seen so much with patients who have had cancer is that the options they're given are very limited. And it's sort of, you have this choice and this is the only choice. But what I hear you saying is, yes, that is a choice, plus here are all the other choices that you can be embarking upon.
Yes, and these metabolic therapies like fasting, diet, exercise, HBOT, these are not going to hurt you, the adjunct therapies. So why not take advantage of them to accelerate your conventional healing? And in our documentary, we do talk to a lot of people who were stage 4 terminal like me chose not to take the palliative treatment, which is they knew wouldn't cure them. I knew that mine wouldn't cure me. And these are people who are documented in medical journals as case studies. So they were some of the first that we talked to. And their stories of healing have been incredible. But it doesn't mean that we're promoting that as the only way to go. Really, I feel that traditional plus metabolic, the combination is stronger than both of them individually.
Yeah.
Oh, so well said. And are there any tests that you would say, hey, everybody needs to run these tests every year to make sure that cancer isn't brewing?
Yeah, Dr. Nasha, who you've spoken to before, has a wonderful list of lab tests. I love doing those. Some people like me are lucky enough to have cancer tumor markers that track their cancer and cancer progression, so I rely on those. I still get my scans several times a year. But for me, very, very personally, I don't rely on my scans at all because, again, with my MRI, you would look at me and think I'm a vegetable, and I'm pretty much fine. I mean, I'm not great, but I'm pretty much fine. And if I believed the scans more than I believe myself, I don't think I'd be doing it as well.
Was that hard to overcome when we have such a society where when the doctor sits up here and tells you how it's going to go down, in order for you to believe in yourself, especially if you've been given a bad prognosis, you have to go against a culture. Yeah. I mean, like I have so much admiration. I think of everything potentially that you did. It's overcoming that patriarchal authority telling you this is the way it's going to go down. That might be the hardest.
Yes.
Yeah. So actually, while you were talking, it just reminded us of the story that when Maggie was in Hong Kong and she basically had this radiation done for the tumors that were in her brain, her next couple of scans started to look like there might be more activity, more cancer in her brain. But we were very lucky to have run across a presentation by Dr. Thomas Seyfried, where he talked about the fact that if you have a radiation to your brain, it will very often kill so many cells, and what you end up with is actually brain radiation necrosis. But on a scan, it's almost indetectable from cancer. Yeah, on a regular MRI, it's indetectable from cancer. So we were just really lucky that we ran across this presentation from him. And then, so when we went in and we heard this from her doctor, he was like, hey, it looks like you got more cancer. Like, we got to go in and do more radiation. Oh, and then the other thing is that if you do more radiation on top of that, it's actually worse. So we were very luckily just sort of prepared to push back. And it was much harder than I thought it was going to be, actually.
But, with all these various men telling me all the sides of the research, I'm very lucky that I have this deep-seated arrogance.
I love it. I love it.
I know better. And it's not always been a good character traits, but
gotten
it really
you in trouble
served me
a few
here.
times, huh?
Yeah.
It really did.
Wow.
And to this day, I love matching wits with my doctors.
I was going to say, and so just to finish up that story, so he finally referred us to another specialist who did a brain scan of hers. This specialist confirmed that it was not more cancer, that it was this brain radiation necrosis. We went back to him because we're like, hey, he's got more cancer patients. He wants to know this, right?
Killed me if I'd followed more radiation.
Most likely, yeah. And so we go to him and we're just like, hey, you might want to know this. We saw this, and he just was sort of like.
Oh, he said, I usually work with a bigger team at my old hospital. And that was it. Like, nothing said to the.
Yeah.
It's just you just want the doctor to be like, oh man, like this is great. This is good information.
Amazing.
I can help other people, right? Or anything like that, right? Or thank you.
Yeah, I would have
He didn't even say thank you.
Sorry, I tried to kill you.
Yeah, nothing. Yeah. It's just like,
right.
ugh. Yeah.
Right. Well, unfortunately, they're not trained to show what they don't know. They're trained to be the most certain person in the room. So, I can understand that. Yeah. Let's finish up on this. You guys are doing something really cool with your summit. I had a lovely conversation with you, Maggie, and was really excited to bring what I know about metabolic flexibility and fasting to it. And I can't tell you how excited I am for the panel that I get to sit on with all those fasting pioneers. So talk a little bit about what it is and why you're doing it, because education is, I think, so important. And I don't know about you all, but I feel like when the pandemic hit, all of a sudden we forgot about cancer. Like we stopped talking about cancer. We started talking about like immune system and COVID. And like, I keep wondering like, hey, are we going to come back to this conversation that cancers are growing?
So
talk a little bit.
Cause of death still. So we made this documentary, Cancer Evolution, with incredible scientists, practitioners, and it explains the why of the metabolic theory of cancer and why your genes aren't your destiny and your lifestyle choices can make such a big difference. But it's just about the why. The science of the treatments, the how, is advancing so quickly. And we're not qualified. We're reporters. So we're not here to tell you how to treat your cancer. But we wanted to bring together the wonderful healers who are there for that. People like you, Mindy, and your presentation is incredible. And so we do have a panel on fasting, including folks like Walter Longo, Jason Fung, you, a couple others in New Zealand, which will be wonderful, talking about other nutritional ways of treating cancer or adjunct therapies like keto or just nutritional dense diet. Off-label drugs, supplements is something that I use. And while we have to be extremely evidence-based in the documentary, I'm going a little bit wider, which is the cancer emotional support in the summit also. So this will be in September 21 to 26. And everyone who joins will get access to the world premiere. And we'd love for your community to take advantage of a coupon code PELZ20 to get 20% off the summit. And we do have to charge for the summit for the platform costs and all of that. But anybody can sign up to get access to the documentary itself for just a donation basis, because that costs us a little bit less money.
So would you watch it if you have cancer, or would you watch it if you want to prevent cancer, or both?
Both. Anybody who has any fear of cancer, someone in their life who has been affected, if they're affected themselves. But we also have a really large percentage of practitioners, doctors, oncologists who are joining to learn more, because this information just isn't out there. And it's so easy for me to joke about these doctors who don't know about it and try to act confident. Nobody goes into medicine not wanting to help people. Their hands just get tied by the system. And that's so frustrating. So we're here to help empower the practitioners and clinicians themselves, but mostly the cancer patients, because you might know my philosophy on that. It's the patient that takes precedence.
Yeah. I was going to say, for both
takes control.
Both the summit and the documentary itself are geared for patients. So, and just to give you a little bit more idea, that the documentary itself is about the metabolic theory of cancer, which, as we mentioned, a lot of people don't know that, the genetic theory of cancer is just a theory. So we haven't really gotten as far as we would have liked using it as the basis for the theory of cancer.
It's a pretty weak theory.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I feel like actually we probably should have started this whole conversation with the theory has changed. It is not cancer is not a disease of your genes. It's a metabolic dysfunction. Can you just I don't want to lose that, because I think if you're listening to this and you've never heard that is ginormous reframe. So talk a little bit about why it's a metabolic disease. You've alluded a bit to it.
Yeah. The main thing that starts, we talk about the scientific history of how this, back in the early 1900s, before we really even knew much about genes or DNA for sure, we were just studying cancer from a very sort of more top-down approach. And this guy, Otto Warburg, the scientist, found that cancer cells were consuming more glucose and using fermentation instead of respiration. It's like when you're using your mitochondria normally use oxygen when you're making energy, and they only turn to fermentation when you run out of oxygen. That's pretty much the only time you use it. And so this metabolic idea of cancer is just that since cancer is using so much more glucose, maybe that had something to do with the way cancer formed.
Well, yeah, and we found that definitely genetic alterations play a role in cancer. You look at a lot of cancers, they have these alterations. But the difference between the metabolic theory is that it starts with damage to your mitochondria and your metabolism, and that causes the DNA changes as a downstream effect. It does not mean that your DNA is what's going to cause you to have cancer. It goes the other way around, is what we're finding. And again, metabolic theory is just a theory, and there's wonderful other theories evolving, like the atavistic model, things like that. And so we're just opening this up, saying we need to do more research, and we can't assume that we've finished cancer while 600,000 people are dying a day of it. We have to continue to research because cancer is evolving and cancer science should evolve.
Thank you.
Yeah, right. And actually, you have me thinking that I don't, for those of us that have been in the biohacking world for some time, that mitochondria has become the target, right? Everybody wants to get at the mitochondria. And I actually think where that obsession with the mitochondria came from is from Thomas Seyfried and this idea that cancer starts in the mitochondria, not in the nucleus where the DNA is at. And once people started to open up that conversation, we started to see, oh my gosh, we got to heal these mitochondria to heal from everything, not just cancer. The whole biohacking world emerged at that moment. And yet I think we lost sight that it started in the cancer movement. And that, is a gift we all got from exploring Thomas Seyfried's work.
Yeah. One just sort of interesting fact on that in that thought is that there's a couple of cells in your body that almost exclusively use respiration. They almost never turn to fermentation. And that's the muscles in your heart and the neurons in your brain. Those cells almost never get cancer. It's extremely rare. If you get heart cancer or brain cancer, it's not those cells, it's the supporting cells around those cells. So just very interesting that the cells that are just constantly using respiration almost never get cancer.
Yeah.
And I think it just shows at the root of all these chronic diseases. Like I believe cancer can be a chronic disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's. They all spring from this metabolism issues that have become endemic in our current society.
Yeah, agreed. Well, thank you. I hope this is going to help millions. I wanted to really come at this conversation from two angles. How do we help the person who got the diagnosis? And how do we all wake up and start to prevent the diagnosis? So I'm really grateful for your work. And of course, I have to finish with my last question, since Maggie, you're already ready for it. Tell me what your self-love practice is and what's your superpower. I think I know your superpower, but I'm curious what you think.
I'll give that away. I already talked about it. It's just the fact that I believe in myself so deeply. Nobody else matters when it comes to
Amazing.
Me. And my self-practice is stress reduction is huge for me. Yoga, meditation, my healing foods, and fasting I could not function without.
Yeah, amen to that. Okay, Brad, you get to answer that too.
My little secret is I take a little bit of me time in the morning, just maybe that first hour of the day or 30 minutes, whatever I can get. And sometimes I meditate, sometimes I just have a cup of coffee, but just having that, extra half hour or hour before I have to take on the world really helps me out.
That's awesome.
Superpower, I think I'll just go with support. I just feel like
he's my real superpower. Just support.
Probably just because Maggie says it to me all the time, but I just I don't. It took a team, I think, to kind of get through what she's been through. So I think that's probably it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I got chills on that one. Well, thank you to both of you. I'm so excited for the summit. I can't wait to get on this panel with Dr. Fung and Dr. Longo. So I appreciate the opportunity, and just keep shouting it from the rooftops. We are all more powerful together when we bring this message. So I really, really appreciate what you're up to.
Thank you for your participation in this, but for everything you do. You've taught me so much and the community so much. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks,
you.
Mindy.